Have you been curious if Neil Gaiman's masterclass is worth the time, effort, and coins? Well, if so, just keep watching because I'm about to give you the answer. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Laura here with another review. If you're new here, hi, I'm Laura and I write young adult horror, and I am on the path towards traditionally publishing, but I'm way in the back of the path, like just got on the path kind of thing. But that is what I'm doing, and on part of that journey toward traditional publishing, I have been on a writing craft journey as well, where I have been reading a lot of writing craft books, hosting a writing craft book club, and also taking some master classes that I wanted to review here on my channel, just like I do with the writing craft books, to let you know if they're worth it. So as you guys can already tell, in today's video, I'm going to be doing my first masterclass review, and that is the masterclass of Neil Gaiman. So I do want to start out by saying this is not a sponsored post. Like, I wish. Neil Gaiman masterclass, somebody call me, although they may have thrown one of those ads for the masterclass at the beginning. They are not sponsoring this video. If you know masterclass or if you know Neil Gaiman, give him my number, let him know I'm interested. But for the time being, this is just something that I did on my own with no coaxing. So I actually have a subscription to masterclass, so I don't pay for the individual classes. I get like a year and you can take as many classes as you want. This subscription was actually gifted to me by a friend, which I truly appreciate. And the Neil Gaiman masterclass is the first of the writing masterclasses that I plan to take, and I do plan to eventually within the year take them all. So I have taken 2 so far, this one and the Margaret Atwood one, which I will also be reviewing on my channel sometime in the next couple of weeks. So if you're not already subscribed and you want to make sure not to miss that one, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll know when that one is available as well. So without further ado, let's get into today's review. So I'm going to be reviewing Neil Gaiman's masterclass. So how I think I'm going to do this is a little different than the craft books. Basically what I'm going to do is still do pros and cons, but I'm going to break the pros into the actual lectures and like the class and then the workbook. And then I'll give some overall cons, and then I'm going to kind of say like, who do I think would benefit from this? And also like, is this worth taking if you have a subscription versus is this worth paying for the individual course? But before we get into the review, I do want to give one caveat to this specific review, and that is that this masterclass did have a section on graphic novels, which I did not watch. So I didn't watch it. I didn't read that part of the book. I basically just skipped it because I do not plan to write graphic novels. It was very lengthy, that section. It was a very, like, all of his sections are really long, like his lectures, and that one was, I think, the longest, and I just didn't feel like it was relevant to me, so I skipped it. So unfortunately, I won't be able to give any feedback on that. But if you are someone who writes graphic novels, and in fact, his is geared toward people who want to write a graphic novel but don't draw, then definitely I think his would be worth it. I can't speak to the specifics of it, but if you want to hear someone talk about that, he does have that section available. But my review will not be reflecting that section. All right, so let's get into now the pros. So overall, an overall pro is that I found this very inspirational. I found him to have great positivity. He gave really great affirmations. I don't know, just like watching him talk and be kind of excited about what he was talking about was very infectious, and it made me really excited about writing. And I think overall that was a pro because like watching him was like, made you like, oh yeah, like writing is great. Storytelling is amazing, isn't it? Like it just kind of gets you jazzed up. So for that alone, that was a big pro, that he just had this aura about him in it that just made you like drawn to him and drawn to this idea of being a storyteller. But more specifics on the pros, let's talk about the actual lectures themselves. So I do feel like there were several sections that I think had really great tips, things that I wrote down, things that I will go back to and want to keep in mind when I'm writing moving forward. So some of the sections that I thought were particularly helpful was his section on truth in stories, and he really emphasizes how you should tell lies or tell stories to get to a truth, and he's really speaking about emotional truth. So you want to convey an emotional truth through these lies of a story that's happening, and the way that he explains this, I think is really kind of like romantic about writing, but in a good way, in a positive way. And I really think it's an excellent advice to give about writing, and he's really kind of honing in on what makes a book special, what makes a book stick out to somebody. And he really gives some good advice on how to hone in on that emotional truth and how to convey that. So I found that to be really helpful. He also has a really great section on how to find inspiration, and he kind of gives you some tips of like things to consider or where to go or how to take typical stories and what you can do with them to try to come up with new stories, you know, talking about asking questions or looking for things that don't make sense, or where did you naturally ask a question in a story, how could you develop that? So he kind of gives some advice on how to come up with story ideas when you feel like you're really lacking, and I found those to be really helpful and interesting, something that I definitely think I would use if I was struggling. And this goes into another section on developing those stories, which I also found super helpful, as well as talking about character and dialogue. So I do think he gives like these little nuggets, these little tips that I don't want to give away. You gotta watch them to get them. But he gives these little tips and things to just, these little nuggets to kind of think about when you're doing these things that I found very, very helpful. And all the exercises in those sections, which I'll get into the workbook later, but the things he wants you to do in order to develop those, I found very, very helpful as well. So development, coming up with ideas and characters. He does a really fantastic job of kind of taking tried and true ideas, but just kind of giving just a little bit of extra that you haven't maybe heard that before or haven't heard it in that way, that really kind of makes sense and resonates. And then he does have a section on a world building, which I think was really helpful. It's not like the most expansive or super in-depth, but I do think he gives you some really great things to think about, and he also gives you some like resources or like avenues to pursue and kind of like rules of world building rather than like how to do it, how to come up with it. It's like, okay, well, when you do, make sure you're doing these things. Now, I don't know if any of these sections, while they are helpful and had good nuggets, I don't know that they were, that anything was like, wow, never heard that before. But there was a way in which he was delivering this information that I did find, again, inspirational, and does kind of resonate. And he does put a little bit of his own spin on it to that maybe that would sit with you differently than, say, hearing that same advice from somebody else in a different way. Now, talking about the workbook, I found the workbook aspect of this one extremely helpful. Now, this was my first one, so I was like, oh, they must all really be like this. But now, since having taken another one and looked at some other workbooks for future ones I plan to take, I think they're very specific to that person. Like, I don't know how much they personally have a hand in it, but they're not all the same. And I found his to be quite dense in a good way compared to some other ones that I have seen. And I found the workbook really, really helpful. All of the, like, so what's really helpful about the workbook itself especially is that it's not just like a summary of what he talked about. It does like kind of reiterate, but just the most important parts, and then expands just a little bit on it to reiterate like the really important points. But what is really, really, really helpful in this workbook is the exercises and the resources. So he provides really excellent exercises. Some I have not heard before that I think would be really helpful. Some that I actually plan to implement myself that really help, I think, like dig deep when thinking about what you're writing and your characters and things like that. So I also really liked that he gave several exercises for each section. There were maybe like 2, 3, 4 per section, and they could apply to different phases of the writing process. So some are like if you're brainstorming, some are if you're revising. So I found that extremely helpful and a huge pro of the workbook as well. And then he also gives a ton of resources. So he gives a lot of book recommendations if you're looking for certain types of things in writing craft. He also gives like a lot of websites and apps that you can use and things like that, that I just felt like that workbook was a great wealth of information that in of itself was very, very useful. Even if, like, for whatever reason you didn't watch the videos, I feel like the workbook would be helpful even on its own. So that's pretty much the pros. They seem a little general, but it's kind of hard because it's a masterclass and not like in-depth book. But yeah, those are like the main pros of that a few good sections that I think had good tips, a great workbook, and very inspirational and just inspiring, energetic, motivating, that kind of stuff. So now, as far as the cons, now what I would say is like the biggest con is that his advice is extremely niche. So if you are in his niche and writing those types of books, well then this one's fantastic. This is great for you. In terms of taking it as a writing class, like MasterClass, like overall for just general writing advice, I don't think a lot of this would apply to like every kind of writing. I think it's really, like I said, niche specific. If you write like him, sort of fairy tale-esque with a like silly fairy tale personality of its own, kind of narrator writing, very whimsical, fantastical writing. I think a lot of his advice lends itself to that and not so much other kinds of writing. He also talks a lot about short stories and, like I said, graphic novels. So like if you're not doing those kinds of things, again, I don't know how helpful that would be. And even though he does write young adult, a lot of his stuff like seems like it's reading kind of young, it has young voice. And so again, I don't know how much that advice would apply to, say, like an adult romance writer. Like I don't think this would really help you that much. But there are some things, but you know, I would lean more toward like it doesn't have as much to help. And one of the pros I said was that it was very inspirational and motivational, which was great, but that also kind of goes a little bit as a con because it's mostly just inspirational, motivational, and not like a lot of practical advice. Not as much. It was a lot more like something you would hear in a speech or like a book chat, or like a, you know, like he's coming to like a reading or something. Not like a lot of nitty-gritty practical like writing craft advice. It was more tips than advice, really. And this is like especially in like the finding voice section, I didn't really find it as helpful as it could have been. And there were a couple other ones where I was just like, nah, this wasn't as helpful as I would like it to be. Another thing that kind of was a con to me and kind of just rubbed me the wrong way is he kept referring to young writers as if that was who was listening. And I don't know a lot of young writers that are taking master classes. I could be wrong. I don't know the demographics, but it kind of made it feel like it wasn't towards me, or that maybe it wouldn't apply to me either because A, I'm old, or B, this is not my first rodeo with writing. I have been writing for a while, even though I'm way in the back of the journey toward being traditionally published. I am not new to writing. And so he just kept addressing like, oh, with young writers you should do this, and young writers should do that, and young writers. It's okay, well, what about us oldies? You know? So I don't know, that was a little, it was a little off-putting. It also made me wonder how much of this was meant for me, and also just really made me feel like he wasn't trying to help me in particular. And he does give a couple of like case studies where he reads from his own work, and I didn't really find those super helpful in terms of like illuminating anything about writing or demonstrating or explicating anything he was saying. But I do think if you really like Neil Gaiman, it was kind of cool hearing him read his own work. Especially if you've never been like a book reading or something, this could be something enjoyable. So like it's a con in terms of like learning, but it could be a pro if you just really love Neil Gaiman and want to like hear him. Because like it's really amazing to hear a writer read their own work, especially if you really love the work. So I think that that is a cool thing in of itself, but I just think that they were also, if you weren't like a huge fan of his and didn't like love hearing him read it, I just don't think they were very helpful personally. And then overall, like I said, I've already kind of said this, but like generally like this wasn't really like I don't know what I was expecting, but this wasn't really like helpful, like in the same way that like a craft book is. Like you don't get as much out of it. It's more about the experience of seeing a famous author talk about like writing tips, and just kind of like hearing him talk about writing. So it's more about like the experience of it, or rather than like really honing in and learning, at least for me and what I got out of it. I just feel like maybe because I've read so many craft books this year, that this one just did not like live up to those. It wasn't really craft advice, but rather just some tips, or like, hey, maybe think about it like this way. So like if you were in a writing creative writing class and like you were gonna have a guest lecturer for the day. Like it was very that, you know? So overall, my overall thoughts was, it was really interesting to see like such a big name like Neil Gaiman talk about writing, talk about his own writing, his thoughts on it. Like he said, he's a very like amazing like presence, you know, and it was really cool just hearing him talk, and it really kind of gave you this warm and fuzzy feeling about writing. So I really did enjoy that, and I really do appreciate the workbook, and I definitely plan to use some of the resources and exercises that he included in there. But overall, it felt more like going to like a reading or like a book event or like a guest lecture, rather than really digging in and learning about writing from an expert in the field or a master in the field. And like who I would generally like recommend this to would be people who are writing his type of writing. So like fairy tale-esque, middle grade, very whimsical, fantastical, that kind of writing I would recommend to them. Other people who are just writers of other genres, I don't know that this is something I would particularly recommend. Now, in terms of, is this worth the cost by itself? I don't think so. I can't say, even for people who write like him, I could not see this being worth shelling out the cash for this one by itself. Now, if you have the year subscription and you can take unlimited courses and you write like Neil Gaiman, then I would recommend it. Or if you love his books, then I would recommend it. But if you're not a huge fan of Neil Gaiman, you don't write like he does, and you don't have the year subscription, definitely don't pay for this. And if you're not a huge fan of his and you don't write like him and you do have the year subscription, maybe take it if you've run out of other ones to take and you just want to take all the writing ones, but I would not bump this up to the top of the list. All right, guys, so that is my review of Neil Gaiman's masterclass. I hope that was helpful for you in deciding if this is something that you want to take. If it was helpful to you, please be sure to hit that like button, because it will tell YouTube that this was helpful and it might suggest it to other people that it could help as well. And if you enjoy my reviews or just looking at my beautiful face or seeing me drastically try to become a traditionally published young adult horror author, then please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my content. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!